The history of the buffalo soldiers in America's early national parks is, for many, a profoundly mind-blowing revelation, challenging deeply ingrained contemporary perceptions. It directly counters the notion that African Americans today don't feel a natural, inherited connection to wilderness spaces. This once forgotten but now increasingly remembered story, which has been actively recollected for over 2 decades, anchors African Americans firmly within majestic environments like the Sierra Nevada, often called the Range of Light. These distinguished soldiers, primarily from the 9th and 10th Regiments of Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Regiments of Infantry, earned their enduring moniker from Plains Indians during the Indian Wars. The Native Americans observed that the hair on the soldiers' heads was remarkably similar to the matted cushion between the horns of a bison. Furthermore, when the soldiers wore bison coats or jackets, the darkness of their skin and the darkness of their outerwear blended so seamlessly that one could not separate the bison from the man. While often associated with the American West and the Indian Wars, the regiments serving in Yosemite and Sequoia had a distinctly different mission. Their arrival in Yosemite in 1899 occurred 50 years after the Mariposa Battalion's involvement in the area's own Indian Wars, meaning the Buffalo Soldiers had no direct connection to those earlier conflicts. Instead, their presence in Yosemite and Sequoia was fundamentally about saving, protecting, and nurturing the national park idea itself. This was an act of safeguarding an intellectual and spiritual invention that, since their time, has proliferated globally, now encompassing over 4,000 national parks. Yet, when they served, only about 9 or 10 national parks existed in the entire world, underscoring their pioneering role as some of the planet's very first park rangers. The speaker's personal journey of discovery vividly illustrates the significance of this forgotten legacy. He points to his ranger hat, a tangible symbol through which he feels history, contrasting his present understanding with his past ignorance. When he worked at the west entrance to Yellowstone National Park in 1987, performing duties like staffing entrance stations and requiring visitors to render firearms inoperative to prevent poaching, he had no idea he was directly mirroring a stewardship role initiated by the Buffalo Soldiers in Yosemite and Sequoia. The very concept of the park entrance station was, in fact, an invention of the U.S. Army troops who managed the parks before the National Park Service was established. This innovative practice was crucial for protecting wildlife, like deer from hunters, and more broadly, for upholding the fundamental concept of a national park. The idea of setting aside nature for preservation, rather than solely for despoilment and resource extraction, was a transformative shift that began in the 19th century with the rise of Romanticism. Influenced by figures like John Muir, society began to look at the world through a new lens, recognizing the inherent beauty in nature that was previously overlooked, as people often saw board feet, lumber, or copper instead of trees or mountains. The African American soldiers of 1899, 1903, and 1904 were an integral part of this profound cultural awakening and the practical implementation of this evolving conservation ethic. The racial context of their service is impossible to overstate. Their tenure in the national parks coincided with what historian Rayford Logan termed the nadir of the African American experience, the lowest point in their post-slavery history, arguably more devastating than slavery itself. While the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and the Emancipation Proclamation offered a little flame of hope, this hope was systematically dashed to the ground by the oppressive black codes and the re-entrenchment of racial subjugation during Reconstruction. At a time when African Americans were relegated to the lowest rung of that ladder, military service offered these young men, many hailing from the Deep South and being the sons and grandsons of formerly enslaved people and sharecroppers, an unparalleled sense of dignity, responsibility, and respect. This intrinsic value of military service made them gravitate towards it, embodying and emitting that respect out into the world. However, their duties were fraught with peril. Enforcing park rules and regulations meant telling predominantly Euro-American visitors what they could or could not do, a dangerous task that required an exceptionally ambassadorial demeanor to avoid offense. They served primarily during the summer months, as winter conditions naturally deterred most Enier wells. The Army's presence in these early national parks, often puzzling to those who only associate the military with combat, stems directly from the founding mission of West Point. Established by President Thomas Jefferson in 1803, the Academy was designed to produce a cadre of engineers for the purpose of building a new nation, particularly in the vast, unexplored Western territories acquired through the Louisiana Purchase. The officers in charge of these African-American soldiers were all West Point graduates, meaning they were extensively schooled in engineering capacities. They understood geology, rocks, soils, plants, and the importance of wildlife. This training equipped them to lead exploratory journeys and provided the practical knowledge required to construct vital infrastructure in a roadless wilderness, knowing how much explosive to use to blast a mountainside, for instance. This engineering expertise was precisely why the Army, rather than a nascent civilian department, was tasked with managing and developing these new national parks. Their tangible achievements in park development were monumental and have been largely overlooked. In Sequoia National Park, under the direct tutelage, power, and grace of Charles Young, a figure whose significance cannot be overstated as the third African-American to graduate from West Point and the first African-American superintendent of any national park in the United States. These soldiers accomplished incredible feats. They built the first usable trail to the top of Mount Whitney, which at that time was the highest mountain in the entire United States, as Alaska was not yet a state. Furthermore, they constructed the first usable wagon road into Sequoia's majestic giant forest, greatly improving access to its ancient sequoia groves. In Yosemite, in 1904, they also designed and built an arboretum on the wooded slopes of the South Fork of the Merced River. This pioneering nature trail featured benches where visitors could sit and observe plants labeled in both English and Latin. This arboretum is now recognized as the first museum in the national park system, marking a foundational contribution to park interpretation and education. Despite these groundbreaking and essential contributions that literally shaped America's national parks, these soldiers were largely forgotten. The speaker emphasizes that the stories of women and people of color are too often lost, but it is incumbent upon all of us to be part of that circle of light, to bring these narratives out of the darkness into a greater radiance. This isn't merely African American history, it's profoundly American history in the Sierra Nevada, a vital legacy belonging to every American and the world. The speaker concludes by noting that his ranger hat is truly a cavalry hat, casting a small shadow on the earth, but that shadow is big enough to cover the whole thing, symbolizing the vast and enduring impact of the Buffalo Soldiers. Their story, once largely forgotten, is now being powerfully re-illuminated, reminding us that every story deserves to be heard.